Good evening, dear audience of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada. On the day leading up to the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, we have gathered this evening to reflect upon what has happened in the past 364 days, as well as what lies ahead. We have invited two distinguished speakers to our webinar today, who, despite their very busy schedules, responded to our requests. In addition, we have two of our advisors, David Gerald Newman and Gary Senft, with us. We also have our special guest, the Executive Director of Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, Janice Hamilton, who would share information about Canada's humanitarian efforts in Ukraine so far. And we are expecting our director, Dr. Hilal Muhyiddin, to join us shortly. Before I formally begin, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We all are promise-bound to work together in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Our distinguished speakers probably need no introduction, as they are well known for their work in the policy sector, education, women empower, and human rights. Nonetheless, please allow me to welcome our Senator First, Mary Lou McFadden, to the webinar. How are you doing, Senator, today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Can you see me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we have our Member of Parliament, James Bezan from Selkirk Interlake Eastman constituency. He is the Shadow Minister for National Defence, Vice Chair of the Standing Committee on National Defence, and Vice Chair of the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group. A warm welcome to you, sir. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thanks for having me back on the panels here at the CRRIC. It's great to join everyone, especially you, Kauser, and Gary and David and Janice. Great to see you. And of course, always proud to share the stage with Senator McFadden.
Thank you so much. Dear audience, before I leave this space, let me set the context for today by briefly reviewing the key events of the past 364 days. I shall share with you an infographic curated by CNN. And before I share the screen and show the infographic, let me also warn you that some of the graphics, some of the events and displays are very graphic, and we should warn the viewers for using their discretion. So have a listen.
Российской Федерации. Народные республики Донбасса обратились к России с просьбой о помощи. В связи с этим, в соответствии со статьей 51 части 7 Устава ООН, санкции Совета Федерации России и во исполнение ратифицированных предлагаю сложить оружие, сдаться, иначе по вам будет нанесен удар. Всім добрий вечір. Лідер фракції тут, голова Офісу президента тут, прем'єр-міністр Шмигаль тут, Подоляк тут, президент тут. Всі ми тут, наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде і далі. Слава нашим захисникам, слава нашим захисницям. Слава Україні! Слава! Українці,
The audience, the ongoing conflict in Russia and Ukraine, known as the one-year war, has been devastating humanitarian crisis that has lasted far too long with no clear end in sight. The conflict has led to a lot of death, forced civilians to move, and hurt the economy in the areas where it happened. The cost of the war in Ukraine, both in terms of human lives and economic damage, has been devastating. According to the United Nations, the conflict has caused more than 13,000 deaths, more than 30,000 injuries, and about 3.5 million people were displaced. The war has also had a big effect on the economy since the conflict started in 2014. On this day that leads to the anniversary of the invasion, we pay our respect and homage to all the souls lost, families separated, and children taken forcibly from their parents. We condemn the scorched earth policy that Russia in Ukraine has and perpetrated war crimes committed in the territory. The audience, on this day, there are two lingering questions that reverberate in the air. How can the international community hold Russia responsible for this unprovoked war? And how this war would end and what victory would look like in the future, what we often call cost of victory. Our plan today, dear audience, is to listen to our honored guests first and then open up for an informal question and answer session, which I shall moderate. So without further ado, let me bring the Senator into the discussion. Senator, what are your thoughts on this war in general and Canada's role in particular when you look back past 1 year? Floor is yours, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, and to you and your team at your center. I really just want to say that it is, I'm not going to say a pleasure. It's a terrible day in many ways. I think that we can talk about victories in small bits, but the overall war for the human race is still very much on the brink. And perhaps today, with the announcements by President Putin some hours ago, we have even more to be terribly, terribly concerned about. I want to just cast back for a bit. 364 days ago, Russia invaded independent, democratic, non-nuclear Ukraine in an illegal war that has killed thousands, displaced millions, disrupted global food, energy markets, economies with no end in sight. Ukraine seems to have limited itself to targeting Russia's military, but Russia is targeting Ukraine as a whole. It's a genocide. It's targeting armed forces, but also infrastructure, people and allies, and NATO countries. In particular, I think one of the greatest horrors that we've learned more about recently is the report on children that have been seized and are being so-called re-educated, and who knows what is happening to those children, and will we ever see them again, and will we ever see them after having been indoctrinated, as we are told is happening. But beyond North America and Europe, the NATO countries, the past 12 months have looked rather different. At the outset of the war, numerous countries in the global south identified with neither the West or Russia. Several dozen, including large democracies, India, Indonesia, South Africa, for example, as well as numerous other countries, particularly in Africa, abstained from resolutions condemning Russia at the UN General Assembly and in the UN Human Rights Council, most recently today at the UN, where once again we had a very strong majority of countries support a non-binding resolution, but again, we had China abstaining and 7 other countries abstaining 32 countries abstaining as well. So many of them have been reluctant to formally adopt the West's economic sanctions against Russia while appearing to respect them. And as the war has unfolded, some of them have sought to maintain, even increase their relations with Russia as much as with the West. So my question for us in our discussion tonight is anyone seriously interested in peace at this point? Today was another turning point where we had Putin say, quote, as before, we will pay increased attention to strengthening the nuclear triad, referring to nuclear missiles based on land, sea, and in the air. I just, even when I say those words, it's horrifying to contemplate. President Joe Biden warned us back in October of 2022, and he said, I don't think there's any such thing as an ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with an Armageddon. And from a legal perspective, the International Court of Justice unanimously determined in its 1996 advisory opinion that a threat to engage in nuclear weapons use, particularly under the circumstances that we see by Putin, stands contrary to international humanitarian law, and that the threat to use nuclear weapons violates the UN Charter. And so we also see that the threats today and the threats leading up to today clearly violate the 1973 bilateral agreement on the prevention of nuclear war, which pledged the United States and the Soviet Union to, quote, refrain from the threat or use of force against the other party, against the allies of the other party, and against other countries in circumstances which may endanger international peace and security. And so here we have more than 130 member states of the United Nations having now ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force just in January of 2021. So it's not the lack of a framework. That's not what our issue is here. It is what can civil society and parliamentarians like myself and James, and I know that James and I may differ on some of our points of discussion tonight. That's something that we both actually enjoy quite a bit, having a vibrant discussion. I'm looking forward to it, but I really want to leave this part of the discussion with this question. Is anyone seriously interested in peace negotiations at this point in time? And what can we be doing as civil society and parliamentarians to move that? Because we're in a war of attrition. And now we have this very clear, I would say beyond a threat, I would say a promise to introduce nuclear weapons. It is a different situation altogether for all of humanity.
Thank you, Senator. I think a very profound question, if there is any genuine interest in peace and with regards to the looming threat of nuclear Armageddon. Thank you, Senator, for bringing up these two very important questions. The audience, let me welcome now our Honorable Member of Parliament, James Bezan, to the discussion. Sir, what do you see looking back 364 days of war, very unprovoked, and as Senator rightly mentioned, it is a genocide attacking civilian infrastructure, which is absolute abrogation of international humanitarian law and Geneva Convention in the conduct of warfare. Member of Parliament James Bezan, the floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kauser. And it is a sombering day to think about what we have been witnessing for the past 365 days. 365 days that, the Russian Federation formally invaded Ukraine, even though that invasion started back in 2014 with the illegal annexation and occupation of Crimea, the proxy war that was fought in Donbass with the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk republics. And we know that that was all backed by the Kremlin from the start. But 365 days ago, we saw Putin march his war machine into Ukraine. And 365 days ago, I think most people assumed that Ukraine would fall within a few days, if not a couple of weeks, and nobody expected it to go on for this year. I was the one that believed that Ukraine would fight with valor, that the people of Ukraine had the tenacity to defend the homeland, that they did not want to have a repeat of history of either Soviet thugs or Russian barbarians, as we're witnessing today, invade their beloved Ukraine. And so we've sat here and watched, war crimes being committed on those fertile plains of Ukraine as Russian soldiers, mercenaries, like the Wagner Group, bringing in militia units from other countries like Syria and Iran, like the IRGC, are also carrying out war crimes by targeting civilian infrastructure, water systems, electric systems, trying to cause a nuclear accident at one of the nuclear electrical facilities across the country right from the beginning of this conflict. And the most heartbreaking is when they indiscriminately bomb schools, hospitals, maternity wards, daycares, the Mariupol theater where hundreds of people were killed, and clearly marked out that there was children present, and yet Russia still bombed that site and killing so many inside. The public prosecutor of Ukraine has already said they've gathered evidence of over 50,000 war crimes. That includes the murder and rape of women, of girls and children. It includes the torture of Ukrainian soldiers. We hear the graphic stories, and it just kind of throws back to 1932-33 with the Holodomor, when Joseph Stalin and his communist thugs, wanted to carry out the Russification of Ukraine and carried out the genocide that saw millions of Ukrainians starve to death. The political leaders, the clergy, the academia were executed publicly on the streets, and we're witnessing that today. But this time, the person carrying out this genocide is Vladimir Putin, with the support of the Kremlin and the kleptocracy that surrounds him. And we've witnessed for 365 days the propaganda and misinformation and the fear mongering that we haven't seen since the Cold War. And unfortunately, Putin and his troll farms have been incredibly successful in infiltrating social media platforms right here in Canada and throughout Western democracies, and something that I think it really bothers us. But as I said earlier, over the past year, we have witnessed amazing bravery. We've witnessed the Ukrainian military stand up to the Russian Federation and push back and hold territory. And, I think we can thank Canada and our NATO allies who did such an amazing job of training. We have witnessed an amazing leader in President Zelensky as he continues to show the way of being the right person at the right time to deal with this crisis in his own country. And he has been strong and clear and very successful in leveraging his ability to talk to our Canada, to allies, and get more and more military equipment so that they can put up the good fight, because they are fighting for our freedom. They are fighting for our democracy. They are fighting for Ukraine's Western aspirations to join the European Union and ultimately join NATO. It's what Ukrainians want. It's not what we want. We have to make sure that we are there for the people of Ukraine. But we've also witnessed some amazing things happening with our allies. When you talk about, NATO, look at Sweden and Finland, who always sat on the margins and now fully engaged in their applications because they see the threat that Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation represent, the imperialistic ambitions that Putin has in trying to reestablish, great Mother Russia as it was when it was an empire. And, we have to applaud them in taking these stands, but also standing there with Ukraine as well. And, Sweden's talking about sending a company of Leopard 2 tanks from their own stocks of 120 tanks that they have to help Ukraine fight back. And, Canada has stepped up, and $5.3 billion in military assistance, humanitarian aid, and financial relief is puts us in the top 5 for providing support to Ukraine. But we can do more, and we must do more. And as the official opposition, we continue to call on the government to do just that. And I think the one thing that inspires all of us is the generosity of those of you that are on the screen with me here, but Canadians right across for stepping up to provide financial assistance, for humanitarian aid, to make sure medical supplies are getting to the front and into communities that are so starved of those medical resources right now in Ukraine, and for housing and helping and employing so many Ukrainians that have come to call Canada home, especially here in Manitoba, where we have taken in more refugees on a per capita basis than anywhere else in the country. So, Mary Lou started off and ended with, where's the peace? And I don't know how we get there. I crave it. I fear, nuclear war. I belong and have for almost the entire time I've been a parliamentarian, parliamentarians for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And it's an international organization, and it's one that I'm proud to be part of. But you're dealing with a pathological liar in Vladimir Putin. He has never honored a single treaty that Russia has ever signed. He never honored the Minsk peace agreements that they had in place. Minsk 1, Minsk 2 was supposed to stop the war in Donbass going back since 2015, 2016. And if he won't honor any piece of paper that Russia signed, how can we trust him? And I think that's where Ukraine find themselves in, is that they need to not just hang on to territory, but recapture their sovereign territory that was stolen from them by the Russian Federation. And that only through a defeat of Russia in Ukraine will ultimately result in the lasting peace that they need and ensure their territorial integrity. And that's something I think that we have to keep in mind as we move forward, but look for those opportunities where we can bring people to the table to have the discussion on how we deal with what the future looks like and how we avoid an all-out nuclear holocaust.
Thank you, James, for, I think, very insightful words that you shared with the audience today. And how do we define peace in the face of utmost evil and with no consideration for the human lives? Thank you once again. Dear audience, let me bring the Executive Director of Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, Janice Hamilton, to the discussion. And she has promised us to share her part of humanitarian assistance that Canada has lent to the people of Ukraine, in Ukraine and elsewhere. Janice, floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Kauser. The Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, we have 40 organizations that are involved in international development and humanitarian assistance. And 40% of our members are actively involved in responding to the war in Ukraine. And we're very quick to get started 364 days ago as well. And I think it's, and this is just a little bit. The government of Canada has provided a lot. Canadians have donated a lot to, civil society and non-governmental organizations. Manitoba government has provided an additional $150,000 that we were able to flow to 4 organizations, just 4 of our organizations. But that's been used for medical aid. Health Partners International Canada has been able to get medical support through pharmaceutical companies, etc., and medical needs that have, provided to hospitals in the Ukraine throughout. Last year alone, it was 37 million in medical aid that they supported and sent to Ukraine, which impacted over 184,000 people in the Ukraine. We also have, UNICEF. We supported them in some of their education around explosive ordnance education. And that went out through humanitarian assistance and food, as well as just on digital platforms, in railroad stations, etc. Because this is going to be a huge factor that's going to continue for decades. And then there's others that are providing cash vouchers to people just to exist, and whether they're in Ukraine or in neighboring countries, etc. And so as the year has gone on, it's moved to different things. Now people, obviously it's winter, so there's need for more blankets and warm clothing and generators and things like that. So there's still a lot of work being done, and obviously there's so much to be done. And it's just part of what's needed. Obviously, peace would be great and an end to this, but this is, I guess this is actually one that has remained in the public's mind, whether that's, because of our connection with Ukraine or the media's attention to it, because often issues, humanitarian things like this, they kind of go off the radar. But this is one that has persisted and is still getting support. So I think that's what I'll end it there, Kaiser.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice. I think these are very wonderful feedback in terms of humanitarian assistance. The audience, as we promised, now our session of informal conversation with the guests that we have today. So first I will bring our advisor, Gary Senft, to the discussion. Gary, you have been involved in many ways at the grassroots level to support Ukrainians coming here. And especially I do recall you have been present with us in all the 4 workshops that we ran from CRIG's platform to educate newly arrived Ukrainians to understand the disinformation war that is happening here in Canada and abroad. So given this background, let me bring you to the discussion. What do you see the future of the war itself? And feel free to ask any questions that you might be pondering when the senator and the member of parliament were delivering their part of the presentation. Gary, floor is yours, sir.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I can't see, but I can speak, so I will. So firstly, I'd like to thank our main presenters for being here tonight and for just being there day after day during this 360, 4-day process so far. And when we think about what we can do is support civility and discussion within our own democracies, and to ensure that we are helping countries, some of them who are the abstainers at this point in time, to understand the significance of the moment. David and myself were clearly very, very engaged in peace efforts generally, but in this circumstance, as James was really describing, it's particularly difficult. So during our discussion, listening to you speaking, we talked about crimes against humanity. We talked about the word genocide. We indirectly talked about crimes of aggression, breaches of the Geneva Convention, and war crimes. So while those are occurring on a daily basis, it becomes difficult, to really foresee the direct route for peace. But we have to keep trying, to find that route. But I would have to say it's difficult. In the Second World War, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, there was the statement that this day will live in infamy. Well, in a way, we've had 364 days of infamy as we've seen civilian structures hit and all the things that we reviewed in that first little film. So, I'm very much a believer that Canada is a very peace-loving country. That makes this a particularly difficult mission that we're engaged in. But, Canada is engaged in so many ways. And so Zelensky had said, very early in the game, basically that we will win. And it's hard to believe when you're thinking of fighting with a superpower. But I believe it is possible, but that it takes a combined effort. So from the Canadian government perspective, James was talking about $5 billion. I'm very interested in what more can we do. And I know, James, that you've been, very active in trying to push, for as much hardware and things that we can do. But just as an example of that, we did lead a bit with 4 Leopard tanks, but my question is, why not 14?
Yeah, and a company of tanks is a dozen, right? And so it comes down to the sad reality is that our current fleet of 112 Leopard 2 tanks, 80 of them which are meant for battle, and the remainder are for purchases, tow ability to handle everything from trenches like that to
James, yeah.
Those are, I think, my. Can you guys still hear me at least?
Yes.
We can hear you, James.
Let me just
go ahead.
You guys can hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Just seems my upload speeds are all right. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure what's happening there, but I'll just say this: that when it comes down to our Leopard tanks, we definitely need to get them fixed and get them so they're there for Canada, but also that we're in a position to donate more if need be. But as we're donating things like the M777 howitzers, as we're donating things like Leopard 2 tanks, we better also be in an active role of replacing them for our own Canadian Armed Forces, so that we can then even donate more to help Ukraine on the field. And I also know that we're sitting on a large fleet of soon to be retired light armored vehicles and track labs. And we're talking hundreds of them that are still in operation and will be replaced with brand new Super Bisons, which are almost finished completion at JDLS in London, Ontario. We did send 39 of them to 39 of the new Super Bisons to Ukraine last summer. But why would we want to take our current fleet of Bisons and Coyotes and turn them into war monuments when we know that they can still provide a fighting ability for Ukrainian soldiers and protect them at the same time? Sending over the 200 Senators, which are armored personnel carriers, I think are fantastic, but you don't move those trucks into the front line. They're there to be able to get people around between the battles safely and quickly, and can withstand small arm fire. But you're not going to put them head to head in a tank battle, and that's what we're having. This war of attrition is very much a tank battle. There's more tanks in eastern Ukraine right now than there is in the rest of Europe combined. And even though Russia has lost an estimate of over 2,000 tanks already in this war, they're still rolling in with more and more all the time. It's estimated that 90% of the Russian forces are already on the ground in Ukraine, and they're using new conscripts, they're using convicts as cannon fodder. And hearing the stories from the front and how they're being just heartlessly sacrificed by military leadership, you would think that the people of Russia would say that enough is enough. But I've been reminded that the Russian people are very resilient, and that they have withstood these tests over time. Every time Russia's ever been invaded, they've lost millions of people, and they continue to fight, and they have never been conquered. So, we have to keep that in mind and how we get from where we're at today to a final resolution, either through the defeat of Putin and his war machine and giving Ukraine all the military assets they need to get the job done without triggering a desperate move by Putin as he threatened today.
Senator, please.
Thank you. I'm waving here. I just have another report also released today. So on the same day that we've had reference to the triad of nuclear weapons, clearly a much more ramped up threat from President Putin, we also have a report released today from the Director General, Rafael Grossi, of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And they have tracked the impact and the significance of the nuclear sites in Ukraine in the context of this war. And I just want to read one paragraph from the report released today. 1 year has passed since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, marking the first time in history that a war is being fought amid the facilities of a major nuclear program. As this tragic war enters its second year, I want to reassure the people of Ukraine and the international community that they can count on the International Atomic Energy Agency to do everything possible within our remit to assist them and to avert the danger of a nuclear accident that could cause even more suffering where there is already far too much. That's the end of the quote. But I raise this now following James' very important comments, because this is an element of risk, and this is a kind of weaponization of energy that I think we have to be keeping a very close eye on. There are so many factors here that could end up causing devastation, regardless of Putin's use of the triad of nuclear weapons. And there are aspects of international negotiation, bilateral, multilateral, civil society to civil society, where I think it's well worth the effort to keep repeating the necessity of paying attention to the risk from the nuclear plants, not only Zaporizhia, and the way in which the people of Ukraine are at added risk precisely because of that.
Absolutely. And this is a very valid point, Senator, that you brought up. And we all know the risk of nuclear accident that might occur just because of the very presence of the reactors in Ukraine. Dear audience, let me bring our advisor, David Newman, to the discussion. And I do recall David is very passionate about peace, Rotary movement. So David, what do you see in terms of civil society actors? And here I'm also echoing a little bit and borrowing some of the phrases from Senator's comment this evening, that the multi-track diplomacy, and we should keep pursuing those avenues of approach of peace. So given this context, David, please come in and share your thoughts. And also, if you have questions for our guests, you may ask now. David.
First of all, I'm grateful for being part of this tonight. And my heart goes out to the freedom fighters of Ukraine. They are not only defending the territory of Ukraine, the culture, the language, the way of life, and the amazing contributions they have made and continue to make to the world, even despite what is happening in the arts and music and dance, in the example that they're setting for defending freedom. But let me put this in a context, because I've heard really nothing but our frustration that we cannot at this moment contribute enough to end this war. Intimidation and offering weapons is not going to bring about peace at this time. So how do we deal with this in what is going to require an attitudinal change? But let me ask some questions, but first answer Mary Lou's first question. Absolutely, civil society, through the people that understand history and understand international law and understand the failure of the United Nations to have the capacity to prevent war begun by one of the veto power countries, the United Nations, that has the right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to nuclear weapons. And like the other 4 countries, United Kingdom, France, the United States, and the People's Republic of China, has failed to negotiate nuclear disarmament, which was supposed to be done in a commitment in 1970 for negotiations in good faith to result in the elimination of nuclear weapons. We have the TPNW, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which 68 countries have signed and ratified. And as Mary Lou said, initially approved of and in the process of ratification in a number of different countries, and hopefully soon we will have 122 to 130 signing and ratifying it. Canada's position was not to support it. Canada's also not adequately supported the whole nuclear disarmament movement at the review processes under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So when you understand all of that history, civil society is absolutely, the informed part of civil society is outraged and frustrated because the United Nations does not have the capacity to protect the global human family. It does not have that capacity. The question is, why not? It was founded in 1945. And since then, why have we not, for the global human family and the country of Canada, why haven't we championed in a moral and humanitarian way for the whole world? And I'm talking the global human family of peoples, the oppressed, the impoverished, the vulnerable, and future generations, and the children who can't vote and can't speak for themselves. The vast majority want to have peace in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are fighting for that peace. But the peace is necessary for the whole world. This is a world war being fought in Ukraine, where they're like an island where where Russia can shoot its weapons. And just to put that in perspective, imagine if the United States, as one of the veto powers of the UN, attacked Canada because they wanted our resources. They were fed up with migrants coming through Canada in the United States. What if they attacked us? Who would defend us? Where would India stand? Where would Brazil stand? Where would Mexico stand? And frankly, where would the United Kingdom and France stand? Right? And the risk of nuclear weapons that could be offered by the United States, that is more than Russia does, right? So Ukraine is it's like a shooting gallery. They can, and so imagine Canada. So we're attacked by the United States. We can't shoot back at the United States, even with the help of countries from around the world providing us with the weapons to do that. We're helpless. So doesn't this just cry out for civil society and a government like Canada with freedom, prosperity, and a multi-racial, multicultural country of distinction that stands for peace building? Why don't we lead? Why don't we lead now with a catalyst of the Ukraine and the heroic battlers in defense of their territory? Why don't we lead in a moral and humanitarian way the global human family and future generations in the way that will require an amendment, a change in the United Nations?
Thank you. Thank you, David. I think these are absolutely valid points and very important to think about. Let me return to our guests. Do you have any complimentary comments based on David's observation about the helplessness of the situation in the UN? And I'm also particularly interested and inclined to ask and get your insights what and how UN can intervene to end this war. Of course, we have seen today's session, non-binding resolution passed, 141 countries cited, but again, a large group of abstention, and Senator has given us statistics in the beginning as well. So given that makes my first question to Senator, what do you think about UN's involvement in ending war and bring peace there?
Well, I think that in some ways I would almost see the way that James characterized himself as a long-standing parliamentarian supporting the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that the United States is somewhat similar in that the military commitment comes first. The need to not lose Ukraine, the devastation of that democracy, of those people, of what Ukraine now stands for the parts of the world where people actually want to be able to make choices and live in peace and have productive economies and fairness in their societies. This is all part of what we stand to lose if we can't back Ukraine and make sure that Russia does not win. But at the same time, I think that we have with this threat we've heard it before and we had it confirmed today in the speech that Putin gave in talking about the activation of the triad of weapons. The fact of the matter is that we have to have multiple tracks operating. And I do know to some extent that we do have preparation for possible peace negotiations is going on in back channels. I understand why it's not being widely discussed. I understand why we don't have a lot of details on it. But at the same time, I think it is an opportunity, much in the way that Gary and David and Janice have all raised, for civil society not to be dwarfed by the reality of the necessity and the reality of the military response. Yes, I think everybody on this call, as committed to peace as we may be, nobody wants to see Ukraine abandoned. And nobody wants to see Ukraine lose this war. At the same time, it is a war of attrition. And the opportunities to have there be a spillover into not only the nuclear element, but the more direct engagement of NATO countries. I mean, right now, it is being fought through one country with a lot of allies contributing, and we want them to contribute. But what we can also be doing is openly calling for the skill building, because Canada's got a lot to give when it comes to soft diplomacy and negotiations for peace. And that is also an area where the United Nations does have expertise. And the United Nations does have a track record in a number of places where there's been conflict to be directly involved in post-conflict reconstruction. And no one wins if all we have left is all. No one wins.
Let me jump in here as well, Kaiser. Just one to
Please.
address a couple of things that David said. One is, civil society is paramount in all this, and one of the things I've witnessed is how active civil society is in Ukraine. If you look at the Orange Revolution, you look at the Euromaidan, you look how those students originally, and then all civil society and the veterans and everybody else came on the streets to denounce the government that they had at the day, and to have elections overturned, have governments flee because of corruption and denying the democratic will of the people of Ukraine. That is the type of action that we need to see across the world, not just on the streets of Kiev and Lviv. We need to see that around the world to achieve the goal of a non-nuclear society where those weapons are outlawed. But we have to also live in the real world. And so deterrence right now is a critical factor. And we have to recognize that, I'd hate to ever say that our friends to the south and their neighbors, their family, and our biggest allies and protectors that would ever want to invade Canada. And I see us as like-minded liberal democracies always wanting to work together and stand up for the same human rights and principles around the world. And that's what makes Canada, I think, unique, is that we have that special relationship with the Americans as well as with our NATO allies and other countries around the world. However, we don't have that relationship with Russia right now. And so the role that we can play in discussing peace, even at a UN level, will not be taken seriously by the Russians. The question becomes, how does Russia even maintain its membership on the UN Security Council when they have completely violated all the rules that are laid out, the charter itself of the UN? But then again, we have to recognize Russia's never ratified the UN charter. Russia inherited the Soviet Union seat and have never passed a resolution or done a presidential decree anywhere in Moscow or in the Kremlin or at the Duma to recognize the UN and their membership within it. So there is, I think, a legal argument on whether or not Russia has the right to sit on the Security Council. And I think the General Assembly needs to pass judgment. And I think that is a place where Canada can lead. And I think that the ongoing isolation of Vladimir Putin and his regime needs to continue to be isolated on the world stage. I think that matters to him because he is a person of great ego. The other thing that we have to look at is how the overall function of the UN has taken place, because they have been very neutered in dealing with this crisis, and their interventions have been lackluster at best. And so we do need stronger leadership there and reform within the UN to bring about the changes that are required so that it can live up first and foremost to its core mission, which was to bring peace and security to the world. And that the international rules-based order that we have all grew up with it will finally be respected again. But instead, we have this degradation created because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And we look at what's happening potentially with the People's Republic of China and the communist regimes, their interest in Taiwan and the backtracking that they've done on the original agreement on protecting the distinct society and culture of Hong Kong and the democracy that was there. I think we have to be concerned when you have dictators and in places like North Korea and the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran and their nuclear aspirations. And again, where's the UN in stopping these types of unnecessary aggressions? And so it is something that we have to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And that's why we do need to be investing in our own military. That's why we need to be providing Ukraine with more light armored vehicles, more weapons, their ability to defend themselves without triggering that ultimate escalation that everybody has been careful about. But at this point in time, 365 days in on this war, the only way that this ends well is Ukraine has to win, Putin has to lose.
Thank you, James. I think these are absolutely valid points. So once again, and we are very close to our end of our session today. But before we end up formally, let me also request Gary first and then followed by David. If you have any further question, you may pose it to our guests today very briefly, because we'll not have more than 10 minutes of discussion left. So Gary, please go ahead. If you have any pressing questions and comments, you may ask now, sir.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you to the speakers. Then quickly, we mentioned grassroots and activism. So tomorrow night, the actual anniversary, the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress is having a rally at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And so everyone hopefully will turn out in blue and yellow. And in addition to that, there's an exhibit that's starting that night that's filmed with Ukrainian artists, sculptors, poets, that's going to be in the Canadian Museum as well. That'll be there till September 30th. So you won't have a chance to see it probably tomorrow just because of the volume of people we anticipate. But I would encourage you in your activism to get out, and in your democracy to stay with it.
Thank you, Gary. David, please go ahead if you have further questions, comments.
Yeah, I will keep going back to the failed United Nations and the need for urgent improvement. But I think you start with the only way we're going to get a negotiation. This war is going to be a lose-lose war. No one's going to win this war. It's a lose-lose war. So all of the efforts of Canada in a moral and humanitarian way, in terms of changing the United Nations, and in terms of persuading G20 countries. We got India, we've got Mexico, we've got Brazil, all having G20 meetings. Canada's a member of the G20. Why don't we use our leverage, like Stephen Harper did with maternal, newborn, and child health, effectively from the Prime Minister's office saying, let's have all charities, let's have our country support that, because that's the best way to bring about important changes in a global basis. Why don't we do the same thing in terms of our G20 membership? He did it as a G8 membership with Melinda Gates backing. Why don't we do the same kind of thing in the meetings to come, starting right now, to contribute to a mobilization of as many G20 countries as possible, and the Indias and the Pakistans and the Bangladeshis, the countries of the world, the Indonesia, that can make a difference in terms of putting money instead of weapons and a lose-lose war, to do as much, not limiting the amount to defend themselves, but do as much as you can. Cost out. What is it going to cost us to continue this war? And what can we save by ending it? How much are we going to invest in bringing about a changed global order with rules that are enforceable? Focus on that. Focus on resourcing it. And let's hope the United States and France and UK and the European NATO members, let's hope that they're not in this for their own self-interest. And to the extent that's a motivation, we should be very concerned about it. Because after this is over, we will not have the new world order, a just world order that is absolutely essential for the global human family, and frankly, for the survival of the human race because of nuclear weapons. So that's my final pitch. It's not a question. It is an appeal to government representatives and people that have influence in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dear audience, we are absolutely at the end of our session. Before we go, we typically go back to our honorable guests to listen to their final thoughts. Senator is possibly not here with us due to some technical difficulties, maybe, but we have our Member of Parliament, James Bezan, with us. James, what are your final thoughts today, having heard various aspects of peace, the resilience, the need for support of Ukrainian defense forces from the allies, especially our country, Canada. So please go ahead and share your final thoughts, sir.
I think my final thoughts are, we have to continue to stand with Ukraine. We have to provide them with the military and humanitarian assistance that they require. I'm going to hopefully be in London in March when our justice ministers are putting together a special tribunal to start the investigation into the war crimes and violations of the Geneva Convention that have been carried out by Russian forces in Ukraine against the people of Ukraine. We need to continue to start the collection of all the seized assets of Russian oligarchs and the Russian Federation and allied nations to help with the rebuilding after the war, to ensure that infrastructure is there and the housing to welcome back all the people of Ukraine that I know that want to return to help rebuild their country after this terrible war. And David's right. This is, although my hope is Ukraine will win at the end of the day. It is a lose-lose when you look at the humanitarian cost, the cost of blood and treasure that's been spilled out, not just by the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine, but all allied nations. But we have to prevent this from escalating into a full conflict between Russia and NATO nations. It may end a lot quicker, but the cost will be a lot larger, and the risk is by far paramount to any discussions that take place as this continues to lag on. I'm hoping that we're not here in 365 days still talking about this, and that at the end of this, that there is a peaceful solution, and one that we hope that the Kremlin will honor, because after a loss, I don't think Vladimir Putin will be able to stay in power for much longer after that. We can hope for that, but then we also have to fear who might replace him. Slava Ukraini. Ukraini.
Kauser, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, Janice, thank you for reminding me. So we have heard James' final comments, and I think these are very hopeful comments, looking at the big picture of the crisis and how it should end. And we also have come to know from James that formally the investigation of war crime is beginning. And I think this is really important to send a message to the regime in Russia, Kremlin particularly, that this is the justice that will eventually be brought to their doors, and nobody will escape because of this unwanted, unprovoked war and killing of civilians. Dear audience, we are going to summarize, and before I summarize, I'm very tempted to share one of the comments from our one of the observers who patiently attended the whole session today. And this is the comment the observer made, and I'm sharing in the screen. And I think this is what, in general, many people think in today's context, that only force would be able to defeat Putin's army from Ukraine. But nonetheless, we have heard from our discussions, from our esteemed guests and our advisors, that peace has a cost to pay, and we have to work together in order to earn the peace. Dear audience, Senator Mary Lou McPherson has rightly mentioned that, and she shared information that there are efforts being undertaken at the behest of number of civil society actors and other track 2 diplomacy and multi-track diplomacy in order to bring peace. And also James Bezan has categorically mentioned that we need to stand by with our resources, whatever we can muster, to support Ukrainian defense forces so that they can overcome the invaders. And I think tides are turning militarily. And as a former military officer, I do clearly see that it is going to be extremely difficult for Russia to hold on the territories. But the variable is how long and how fast Ukrainian armed forces can mobilize their resources and recapture the lost territories. And I think this is one of the ways Russia can be defeated. However, you have heard from all the speakers that along with the military efforts being undertaken on ground, we have to keep pressuring the peace process from various corners. My heart is kind of, I have a mixed feelings this evening, because on the one side, I see Mr. Putin addressed a whole gallery of people in Russia, those who are chanting and celebrating, the cause of invading Ukraine. And on the other hand, in Trafalgar Square, thousands of British nationals joined today to support the war in Ukraine and to remember the cost of human lives that has happened over the past 364 days. So we have both these, group of people, and also you have seen in the UN, 32 countries really abstained. And I just keep wondering, what are the leaderships of these countries actually think about world peace? Especially my question to India and South Africa and China, that your leadership, if you think that this is not something warrants our attention today, and this is something you do not really take it seriously, bringing peace in this whole region, then what else is left? India is a democracy, South Africa is a democracy, and these two democratic countries have joined together in not voting today's non-binding resolution. That's make me very, very sad. And I think I would like to pass this message to our audience that this is not about India and South Africa and China supporting Russia in this unjust war, but this is about people, humanity at large. Those are at stake, and we all want to see peace on earth, and we all want to see Ukraine remains and it can maintain its territorial integrity and sovereignty, based on which whole world system has been created. So with these thoughts, let me also conclude by saying that Conflict and Resilience Research Institute is very proud to have conducted a small project on disinformation, and we have trained and we have educated over 49 newly arrived Ukrainian nationals, those who have come to Winnipeg. And tomorrow we have the final workshop. Please tune in and you will find our resources to detect disinformation of and about Russian war. And also we are going to receive one young female student from Ukraine, from Lviv, who's coming in July to stay 3 months with Creek, and is sponsored by MyTech and from University of Winnipeg. So in these ways, we are trying to support the cause of war and Ukrainians, brothers and sisters, to fight and to stand against Russians' unjust war. So here we end, and please tune in our future webinars. And tomorrow, please join us in Canadian Museum for Human Rights in support of Ukraine, and to echo the voice that we all want peace, not war. Thank you. Have a nice rest of the evening. Bye-bye.